in AI as a competitor. He drove me to be as more obsessive about the game, because I had to figure out how to solve that problem.
Right.
And I told him when I saw him here this weekend, I said, man, you don't realize how much you push me. And I don't think people nowadays realize how great you were as a player.
He's too good. That is what the stories from NBA legends seem to say about Allen Iverson. But those same stories also reveal the limits behind the legend. Picture a cold night in March of 1997. A rookie guard, barely 6 feet tall, stands at the top of the key. Across from him is Michael Jordan, the greatest player the game has ever known. The rookie fakes left. Jordan shifts his weight to cut off the drive. Then, in a flash, the rookie snaps the ball back to his right. 2 feet of space appears out of nowhere. He rises. He shoots. The ball drops through the net. The crowd explodes. That rookie was Allen Iverson, and that single move became one of the most replayed highlights in basketball history. It made people believe he was simply too good for anyone to handle. And as we look at what the praise leaves out, use the hype feature and give this video some hype so more basketball fans can join the debate. But here is the question this video wants to answer. Was Allen Iverson really too good, or did his legend grow bigger than the full story deserves? Over and over, the biggest names in basketball praised him. Michael Jordan respected him. Kobe Bryant obsessed over him. Shaquille O'Neal admired his courage. LeBron James called him one of the most influential players ever. Dwayne Wade modeled his own career after him. Tyronn Lue found his career changed because of him. Larry Brown built a championship team around him. Greg Popovich explained how he could fit beside another superstar. Gary Payton called him one of the hardest players he ever had to guard. All of that praise is real. But each story also holds a second half, a part that is easy to skip past when all anyone remembers is the highlight. This video will walk through those stories in order, from his rookie year to his final seasons, and ask a simple question each time. Does the praise prove he was truly unstoppable, or does it also show where his game and his teams ran into trouble? By the end, you will have heard from 9 different legends, each one respected, each one honest, and each one adding a piece to a picture that is far more complicated than a single crossover or a single step over could ever show on its own. Allen Iverson entered the National Basketball Association in 1996 as the very first pick in the draft. He stood about 6 feet tall. He weighed under 170 pounds. That is small for basketball, especially for the era he entered. In the late 1990s, the NBA was built around size and physical contact. Big men controlled the paint. Games moved at a slower pace. Guards were expected to pass first and score second. Iverson did not fit that mold, and he did not try to. He brought a street ball style of dribbling that most fans had never seen on a professional court. He wore his hair in braids. He covered his arms in tattoos. He dressed in baggy clothes and heavy jewelry, pulling hip-hop culture straight into the middle of a league that had never looked like that before. Many young fans loved it. Many older basketball people were uneasy about it. Coaches who had spent decades running structured half-court offenses suddenly had to think about a player who wanted to create everything on his own, possession after possession. The league itself eventually reacted, introducing an official dress code in 2005 that pushed players toward a more formal look on team business. That single fact shows how much of an impact Iverson's presence had, even off the court, years into his career. But changing how basketball looked is not the same thing as proving that his style was the best way to build a championship team. Those are two very different questions, and this video will keep separating them from each other, story after story. Iverson still put together a remarkable individual resume, one that no honest account of his career can ignore. He won 4 scoring titles across his time in the league. He was named Most Valuable Player in 2001. He led his team all the way to the Eastern Conference Championship that same year, a run that will come up again later in this video. Those achievements are real, and they matter, and nothing that follows is meant to take them away from him. But how he got there, what it demanded from the players around him, and what it cost his own body along the way, is where this story becomes far more complicated than a highlight reel can ever show. To understand the size of the moment, we have to go back to March 12, 1997, at the Core State Center in Philadelphia. Iverson was 21 years old, still a rookie, playing against Michael Jordan and the Chicago Bulls. Jordan was already the most feared player alive, a 6-time champion in waiting who had spent a decade proving he belonged at the very top of the sport. During one possession, Chicago's coach, Phil Jackson, called for Jordan himself to switch onto the rookie. Iverson had openly said he wanted to test his crossover against the best player in the world, and now, in front of a packed arena, he finally had his chance. Iverson began with a smaller move, a fake crossover to his left. It was not meant to score, it was meant to read Jordan's feet, to see how he would react to the very first hint of pressure. Jordan shifted his weight to protect the left side, just slightly, the kind of small adjustment that most defenders make almost without thinking. That was all Iverson needed. He snapped the ball back hard to his right. The sudden change of direction opened about 2 feet of space, enough room for a clean look at the basket. Iverson rose and released a 20-foot jump shot. Jordan recovered as fast as he possibly could and contested the shot anyway, closing out with everything he had left. It did not matter. The ball went in, clean, with barely a sound as it dropped through the net. By the end of the night, Iverson had scored 37 points, making 15 of his 23 shots. An extremely efficient night for any player, let alone a rookie, facing the greatest player alive. Jordan finished with 23 points, 5 rebounds, 3 assists, and 2 steals. A quiet but effective night by his own enormous standards. And here is the detail that so often gets left out of the story when people replay the crossover. Chicago won the game, 108-104. The crossover became bigger than the final score. It is still shown today as proof of Iverson's greatness, replayed in highlight packages decades later, but the Bulls walked away with the win that actually counted in the standings. That is the pattern this video keeps coming back to, again and again. A legendary individual moment, wrapped around a team result that tells a very different story than the highlight alone. Off the court, Iverson had admired Jordan long before that night, once describing him as having an almost otherworldly presence on the floor, something that separated him from every other player Iverson had ever watched. Years later, the two crossed paths again at a Charlotte Hornets game, long after both men had built their own legacies. Iverson told Jordan how much he respected him. Jordan laughed and told him that he could not truly love him, not after crossing him up like that in front of the entire world. It was a playful moment between two competitors who had earned each other's respect. But it also shows that even Jordan never forgot that single possession from all those years earlier. One move, one basket, and decades later, it was still part of their relationship, still worth bringing up whenever the two of them met. That is the power of the highlight. It is also exactly why it can be so easy to remember the crossover and forget who actually won the game that night in Philadelphia. If Jordan represented Iverson's arrival, then Kobe Bryant represented the response to it, the moment the rest of the league decided it could not simply admire Iverson from a distance. On March 19, 1999, Iverson dropped 41 points and handed out 10 assists against the Los Angeles Lakers, with Bryant guarding him for much of the night. Iverson had picked apart one of the most gifted defenders in the league on a night when Bryant himself was still establishing his own reputation, and Bryant did not take that loss lightly at all. He later admitted that it left him deeply frustrated enough to change how he prepared for every single opponent for the rest of his career, not just Iverson. Bryant did not simply watch a few more highlight tapes and move on. He studied every piece of film he could find on Iverson, going all the way back to his high school games at the IUPU All-American game, long before Iverson had ever played a single NBA minute. He read scouting reports, he read articles, he studied Iverson's background as a person, trying to understand what made him move the way he did, what drove him, what made his first step so different from anyone else's. Then Bryant did something unusual, something that says a great deal about how seriously he took the challenge. He studied footage of great white sharks hunting seals off the coast of South Africa, watching how the sharks waited patiently, sometimes for long stretches, before attacking at exactly the right moment. Bryant applied those same ideas of patience, timing, and angles to defending Iverson, trying to predict his first step instead of simply reacting to it after the fact. The work paid off on February 20, 2000, in Philadelphia, less than a year after that frustrating loss. At halftime, Lakers coach Phil Jackson made a decision. He assigned Bryant to guard Iverson directly for the rest of the game, putting his young defender directly on the league's most electric scorer. From that point on, Iverson did not score again for the rest of the night. Bryant held him scoreless through the entire second half while putting up 18 points of his own, and the Lakers won 87-84. Think about what that actually means. One of the most feared scorers basketball had ever seen was shut down completely for 24 straight minutes by a defender who had studied him like a puzzle, waiting to be solved, piece by piece, until the answer finally clicked into place. Bryant later gave Iverson one of the highest compliments a rival could ever offer, saying the league should be grateful that Iverson was not 6 feet 5 inches tall, because at that height, with his speed and skill, he might have been completely impossible to stop. That statement gets repeated often, and it should be, because it shows enormous respect from one of the greatest competitors the game has ever seen. But look closely at what it actually says. It is a hypothetical. It imagines a taller version of Iverson who never existed on any basketball court. The real Iverson, the one who actually played every one of his 14 seasons, was 6 feet tall, and that size was part of what eventually let elite preparation catch up with him on nights like that one in February. His threat was real, undeniable, and terrifying for opposing coaches to plan around. But so was the fact that it could be studied, mapped out, and in the right circumstances, with enough patience and enough film study, contained by a defender willing to put in the work. Think about what it actually took for that halftime adjustment to work. It was not a lucky guess by a young player having a hot night. It was months of preparation, film study, and even research into how predators in nature hunt their prey, all aimed at a single opponent. That is an enormous amount of effort spent trying to solve one man's game. In a strange way, the scale of Bryant's preparation is itself proof of how dangerous Iverson really was. Nobody studies sharks hunting seals to prepare for an ordinary scorer, but it is also proof that Iverson's brilliance, as overwhelming as it looked on a given night, was not some unsolvable mystery. Given enough time, enough film, and enough patience, even the most explosive scoring guard in the league could be studied, understood, and eventually slowed down by a defender determined enough to do the work. Kobe Bryant was not the only defender who found Iverson to be a nightmare on the court, and it would be unfair to treat this as a story about just one rivalry. Gary Payton, one of the greatest perimeter defenders the game has ever produced, repeatedly named Iverson as one of the toughest individual matchups of his entire career. Payton had guarded some of the best scorers in basketball history over the course of a long and decorated career, so that alone says something meaningful about Iverson's ability. What made Iverson so difficult was not just his speed in a straight line, the kind that could be timed and measured. It was the way he could move side to side, east to west, and then suddenly explode straight toward the basket, north to south, without any warning at all. Defenders were left constantly trying to recover, always one step behind, never quite settled into a comfortable defensive stance. Payton's praise reinforces something this video has already shown through Jordan and Bryant. In a one-on-one situation, possession by possession, Iverson was about as hard to guard as anyone in the entire league. But being difficult to guard by yourself is not automatically the same thing as being the ideal foundation for a winning team. Those are separate questions, even though they often get blended together in highlight videos and career retrospectives. Basketball history is full of brilliant individual scorers whose teams still struggled to win consistently, year after year, despite their talent. Iverson's one-on-one brilliance is not in question anywhere in this video. What is in question is what it took on the other 4 positions on the floor to turn that brilliance into an actual winning structure that could compete for championships. That brings us to the 2000 and 2001 season, the high point of Iverson's career, and also the clearest example of exactly how much it took to build a team around him. Iverson's relationship with head coach Larry Brown was never simple, not for a single season they spent together. Brown believed in ball movement, defensive discipline, and structure, the traditional values of a coach who had spent decades in the profession. Iverson believed in attacking, scoring, and carrying the team on his own shoulders, night after night, possession after possession. The two clashed constantly over practice attendance, over shot selection, and over Iverson's conduct away from the court, tensions that spilled into the media more than once. At one point, a trade that would have sent Iverson to the Detroit Pistons nearly happened, falling apart only because of contract details involving a player named Matt Geiger, a deal that could have completely rewritten both of their careers. After that trade collapsed, Brown and Iverson found a working compromise instead of walking away from each other. Brown moved Iverson away from point guard and into the shooting guard role, taking away much of the responsibility for setting up teammates on a possession-by-possession basis. Eric Snow took over more of the traditional point guard duties, freeing Iverson to focus almost entirely on scoring the basketball. Around that arrangement, Philadelphia built a defensive-minded roster designed specifically to support Iverson's offensive load, filling out the other 4 spots with players whose job was to make up for what his style could not provide on its own. The results were remarkable, and they deserve to be stated plainly before anything else. Iverson won the MVP award that season, averaging 31.1 points per game, a number that put him among the very best scorers in the entire league. But look closely at who stood beside him on that roster. Dikembe Mutombo won Defensive Player of the Year, protecting the basket and cleaning up mistakes that Iverson's gambling defensive style sometimes created. Aaron McKie won Sixth Man of the Year, providing scoring and playmaking off the bench whenever the starters needed a rest. Larry Brown himself won Coach of the Year, the architect who had rebuilt an entire system around one single player's talents. Philadelphia finished 56-26 and won the Eastern Conference, a genuinely historic accomplishment for the franchise. That season proves Iverson could be the centerpiece of a winning team, without question. It also proves how specific and how carefully built that team had to be around him. It needed a rim protector, a secondary playmaker, a bench scorer, and a coach willing to reshape an entire offensive system, all to support one player's scoring habits and one player's approach to the game. This was not a normal roster assembled by chance. It was a custom-built machine, engineered piece by piece around a single engine. Years later, Iverson looked back and gave Brown real credit, saying that Brown was the one who pushed him to reach his full potential and helped shape him into a Hall of Fame player, an admission that did not come easily from a man who had spent so many seasons resisting Brown's methods. That admission matters a great deal to this story. It shows that even Iverson understood, eventually, with the benefit of years of distance, that the structure he so often resisted was part of what made his greatest season possible in the first place. The very discipline he fought against during countless practices was the same discipline that helped build the team good enough to carry him all the way to the finals. It is worth sitting with that for a moment, because it cuts right to the center of this entire video. Iverson did not simply walk onto the floor and win games by himself. He needed Eric Snow to organize the offense, so he did not have to. He needed Dikembe Mutombo to clean up the mistakes that came with his gambling, high-risk style of defense. He needed Aaron McKie to provide scoring when he needed a rest. He needed Larry Brown to redesign an entire coaching philosophy around one player's habits, something very few coaches would ever agree to attempt. Every one of those pieces had to fall into place at the same time for that single MVP season to happen. Remove any one of them, and the story of that year likely looks very different. That is not a criticism of Iverson's talent. It is simply a reminder of how much support even a truly historic individual season actually required behind the scenes. The physical toughness Iverson showed throughout his career earned him respect from the league's biggest and strongest players, including Shaquille O'Neal, a man who towered over Iverson on every single possession they ever shared a court for. During an era of heavy contact in the paint, most small guards avoided direct collisions entirely, choosing floaters or mid-range shots instead to protect their bodies. Iverson did the opposite, night after night. He drove straight at defenders who outweighed him by 100 pounds or more, absorbing hit after hit, without ever backing down or changing his approach. O'Neal repeatedly praised that fearlessness in public, admiring how Iverson kept attacking the basket no matter how hard he was hit or how many times he ended up on the floor. That courage reached its most famous moment in Game 1 of the 2001 NBA Finals, the biggest stage Iverson would ever play on. Iverson scored 48 points that night, and Philadelphia handed the Lakers their only loss of the entire postseason, a stunning result against a team many had expected to roll through the playoffs untouched. To try to slow him down, Lakers coach Phil Jackson turned to backup guard Tyronn Lue, who had spent practice sessions studying and mimicking Iverson's speed to prepare the starters for exactly this kind of night. During overtime, Iverson created just enough space for a step-back jumper along the baseline, the kind of shot that only a handful of players in the league could even attempt with confidence. He made the shot directly over Lue. As Lue lay on the floor, Iverson stepped over him, a moment captured forever by cameras from every angle. It became one of the most replayed images in NBA playoff history, a symbol of total domination captured in that single frozen moment. But that image tells only part of the story, and it is worth slowing down to look at the rest of it. The step over represented one win, one single game, inside a series the Lakers still controlled from start to finish, and ultimately won. The picture froze a moment of individual glory, forever preserved in highlight reels and posters, but it did not freeze the outcome of the championship itself. That distinction matters more than it might seem at first glance. A single dominant performance, no matter how unforgettable or how widely shared, is simply not the same thing as winning it all. What makes this story even more interesting is what Tyronn Lue himself later said about it, long after the moment had already become a piece of basketball folklore. Rather than treating the moment as pure embarrassment, something to be avoided in every interview for the rest of his life, Lue explained that Philadelphia's run to the finals gave him crucial playoff exposure he might never have received otherwise, exposure that shaped the entire rest of his career. Guarding the league's most valuable player put him in front of coaches and front offices across the entire league, people who might never have noticed a backup guard in any other circumstance. Lue has said, in his own words, that defending Iverson helped save his professional career at a moment when it could easily have quietly ended. The two later became close friends, an outcome few people would have predicted while Lue was still lying on the floor. Iverson has praised Lue for accepting an assignment that other guards tried hard to avoid, understanding exactly how difficult that job really was. The man remembered as the victim of that famous highlight actually saw real professional value in the moment, once enough time had passed for him to look back on it clearly. That is a far more complicated story than the freeze frame alone could ever tell on its own. It says something important that the person closest to the moment does not remember it the way the rest of the world does. Millions of fans see the step over and think of it as a humiliation. Lue himself sees a turning point that opened doors for the rest of his working life in basketball, first as a player and later as a respected coach. Both of those things can be true about the very same 3 seconds of game action. A single image can mean one thing to the crowd watching it happen, and something else entirely to the two men who actually lived through it. Not every chapter of Iverson's career was about highlights and famous images. On May 7, 2002, following a first-round playoff loss to the Boston Celtics, Iverson held a press conference that became one of the most famous in the history of American sports, for reasons that had nothing to do with basketball itself. It came after public criticism from Larry Brown about his approach to practice, criticism that had been building for years by that point. During that press conference, Iverson repeated the word practice 22 times, in a moment that has been replayed, mocked, and analyzed ever since. Looking back with a modern understanding of athlete recovery, there is real sympathy hidden inside that moment. Sympathy that many people missed at the time. During his prime years, Iverson often played between 40.8 and 43.7 minutes a night, enduring constant physical punishment along the way, night after night, across an 82-game season. His body absorbed hit after hit for nearly every minute of every single game he played. Today's teams often rest healthy stars to protect their bodies over a long season, an idea now widely known as load management. Seen through that modern lens, Iverson's frustration looks less like simple stubbornness and more like the reaction of a player whose body was genuinely worn down by the extreme demands of his own playing style. At the same time, that press conference exposed something else too, a genuine and unresolved conflict between Iverson's personal approach and the structure Larry Brown was trying to build around him. Giving everything in games did not remove the value of practice, preparation, or accountability to teammates who depended on him to show up. Iverson's all-out style put enormous stress not only on his own body, but on the coaches and teammates trying to build a disciplined, dependable team around a player who resisted the very routines meant to sustain that discipline. Both things can be true at exactly the same time. His exhaustion was real and understandable given what his body went through. So was the tension his approach created with the very structure that had made his best season possible only a year earlier. Watch that press conference today, and it plays very differently than it did back in 2002. At the time, many people treated it as a punchline, a strange rant from a star who did not want to put in the work. Viewed now, alongside everything sports science has since learned about recovery, rest, and the toll of playing over 40 minutes a night, it looks more like an early warning sign than a joke. Iverson was, in his own blunt way, describing a problem that the entire league would eventually take seriously enough to build whole coaching staffs and medical departments around. That does not make him right about everything he said that day. It simply means the moment deserves a more careful second look than the punchline it became. Iverson's later years brought a new kind of challenge, this time in Denver, where he was paired with another ball-dominant scorer, Carmelo Anthony, a young star with his own enormous offensive responsibilities. Many people questioned whether two players who both needed the ball so often could ever share the court successfully over an entire season. San Antonio coach Greg Popovich offered a different view, one grounded in tactics rather than assumptions, explaining that Iverson created mostly from the perimeter using his speed, while Anthony worked from the mid-post and low block, closer to the basket where his size gave him an advantage. Because their preferred areas on the floor did not fully overlap, a defense could not simply load up against one of them and safely ignore the other. It was a smart, sound, tactical explanation from one of the most respected coaches in the sport, and it showed real respect for how Iverson's game could complement another star rather than compete with him for the same space. Yet even with that intelligent fit, carefully explained by a coach who understood the game as well as anyone, the result already written into the record remains exactly the same. The pairing never delivered a championship to Denver. Iverson himself later said that winning requires contributions from all 5 players on the floor, not just 2 stars getting along with each other on paper, and that the team's shortcomings were not simply proof that he and Anthony could not play together. That is a fair and reasonable point, one worth taking seriously, but it does not erase the outcome that actually happened. Even when the tactical fit made sense, and even when respected coaches defended the pairing in public, the results still fell short of what everyone involved had genuinely hoped for. There is a broader lesson hiding inside the Denver years, one that stretches beyond just Iverson and Anthony. Popovich's explanation shows that Iverson's game could be intelligently designed around that a smart coach could carve out space for him beside another elite scorer without the whole thing falling apart. That is real praise for how his skill set worked on the floor. But it also quietly repeats a theme that keeps showing up throughout this entire story. Iverson's success almost always depended on somebody else building the right structure around him first, whether that was Larry Brown reshaping Philadelphia or Popovich explaining how Denver's 2 stars could share the same space. His talent was never really the question. The question was always what it took and who it took to turn that talent into a winning team. Move away from wins and losses for a moment, and Iverson's influence tells a very different story entirely, one that stretches far beyond basketball itself and into the wider culture. LeBron James has called Iverson the greatest pound-for-pound player the game has ever seen, a way of describing just how enormous his impact was compared to his relatively small size. James has also placed Iverson, alongside Stephen Curry, among the 2 most influential players of the modern era, a remarkable comparison from a player often considered the greatest of his own generation. According to James, Michael Jordan expanded basketball's reach around the entire world, but Iverson and Curry changed how the players who came after them actually played the game and expressed themselves while doing it, on and off the court alike. That influence went far beyond style on the court alone. Iverson refused to change his clothing, his tattoos, his braids, or his attitude to make anyone else more comfortable, and that refusal gave later athletes permission to be themselves too, without apologizing for who they were. Dwayne Wade is one of the clearest examples of that influence anywhere in the league. Wade chose to wear the number 3 because of Iverson, a small but permanent tribute worn on his chest for years. He wore a padded arm sleeve throughout his career as a direct tribute to him as well. When Wade was inducted into the Naismith Memorial Basketball Hall of Fame, one of the highest honors the sport can offer, he chose Allen Iverson as his presenter, thanking him publicly for opening a path that let guards from similar backgrounds believe they truly belonged in the league too. This part of the legacy deserves real respect, and it should not be dismissed or treated as an afterthought to the basketball itself. A jersey number, an arm sleeve, and a Hall of Fame introduction are small details on their own, but taken together they show how deeply one player's identity can shape the identity of the players who watched him growing up. That kind of influence does not show up in a box score, and it does not need to, because it lives on in how the game looks and feels decades later. But it is worth asking one more honest question before this video reaches its conclusion. Cultural influence is one of the strongest parts of Iverson's case for greatness, and it is completely real, but it can also make it easier to avoid harder basketball questions about team construction, winning percentage, and championship impact. Being important to the culture of the game and being the ideal blueprint for building a champion are simply not the same claim, even though the two often get talked about as if they were interchangeable. So where does that leave the question this video opened with, back on that cold night in March of 1997? Jordan, Bryant, Peyton, O'Neal, Brown, Lou, Popovich, James, and Wade all had different relationships with Allen Iverson, as a rival, a student, a coach, a teammate, or an admirer, and each one saw a different side of him. And yet their stories, taken together, keep landing on the same pattern, again and again, no matter whose voice is telling it. He really was too fast, too fearless, too creative, and too influential for anyone in the league to simply ignore, whatever side of the argument they landed on. His crossover on Jordan became legendary, even though his team lost that night by 4 points. His scoring forced Kobe Bryant into an obsessive study that eventually found a way to slow him down completely for an entire half. His one-on-one brilliance made him a nightmare for a defender as great as Gary Payton, without ever turning that brilliance into an easy formula for winning games consistently. His greatest season required an entire roster built specifically around his scoring, alongside a coach willing to redesign an entire system just to make it work at the highest level. His step over on Tyronn Lue became one of the most iconic images the sport has ever produced, even though the Lakers still went on to win that series in 5 games. His practice speech revealed both the physical toll of his all-out playing style and a real unresolved conflict with the structure a winning team actually requires to sustain itself over a long season. Even a thoughtful tactical fit alongside Carmelo Anthony in Denver, carefully explained by one of the smartest coaches in the sport, could not deliver the championship so many people had genuinely hoped for. None of that erases what Allen Iverson accomplished across 14 remarkable seasons. And none of it should ever try to. A career this debated, this studied, and this remembered is, in its own way, proof of just how much he mattered to the sport. Few players in basketball history have earned this much respect from legends across so many different roles, eras, and positions on the floor, from rivals who studied him, to teammates who fought beside him, to successors who grew up wanting to be like him. He changed how small guards were viewed forever, opening doors for players who never would have been given a chance in an earlier era. He changed how players expressed themselves off the court, wearing their own identity without apology. He gave an entire generation of athletes and fans permission to be exactly who they were, without ever needing to change themselves to fit some old, narrow idea of what a professional basketball player was supposed to look like. Allen Iverson may not have given basketball the perfect, tidy model for how to build a champion, but he gave the entire game something far bigger it could never possibly forget.